The hospital janitor worked nights, barely noticed by anyone, until a K9 wouldn't stop barking at his cart. Security checked the cameras, and what they uncovered left the entire staff frozen in disbelief. Could one dog have uncovered something no human ever saw coming? Here's the full story. But before we roll it out, drop your favorite dog's name in the comments below, and if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. What we've got coming next, you'll definitely want to be here for it. The hospital never truly slept, but after midnight, Memorial Heights Medical Center quieted into something more solemn. The buzz of the day faded to a low hum, occasional beeps from monitors, hushed footsteps, and the gentle rustling of night shift staff moving through dim corridors. Officer Brandon Keller adjusted his uniform collar as he stepped through the sliding glass doors. By his side, Zeus, a German shepherd with alert eyes and a calm, calculating demeanor, followed without a sound. The two had worked together for over 3 years, patrolling high-risk events and providing hospital security during cases involving pharmaceutical theft, domestic disturbances, most recently, a string of internal anomalies no one could quite explain. The assignment to Memorial Heights wasn't routine. Hospital administrators had quietly requested the K9 unit after a pattern of missing items, nothing valuable, just odd little things, syringes, expired vials, even patient wristbands, began to raise internal questions. No one could explain why the incidents weren't being reported officially. There was no theft of narcotics, no data breach, just a growing sense that something felt off. Brandon had his doubts when he first reviewed the case, but when Zeus displayed persistent alert behavior on his first walk through the facility's north wing, without the usual narcotics trigger, his instincts told him to dig deeper. It was during the third overnight rotation that Zeus first reacted to the janitor. Brandon was doing a perimeter round on the oncology wing. The floor, normally occupied by patients fighting through the darkest chapters of their lives, was nearly empty tonight. Staff moved methodically, speaking in low tones. The scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air. Zeus walked slightly ahead, his body language relaxed but focused, until they turned down hallway 3B. The moment they rounded the corner, Zeus froze. His ears perked, eyes locked down the hallway. At the far end, a janitor was emptying a trash bin into a rolling cart. The man's back was to them, movements slow and measured. His posture, hunched, shoulders tight, seemed more than just fatigue. Zeus emitted a low whine. Brandon narrowed his eyes. Zeus didn't bark often. He was a quiet dog by nature, trained for restraint unless encountering direct threats. But now his behavior changed rapidly. Low growl, body tensed, tail straight and still, and then a sharp bark. 1, then 2. The janitor turned. He was middle-aged, short-cropped hair under his hospital-issued cap, face pale under the artificial lights. His badge read, Harold Grayson, Environmental Services. Evening, the man said stiffly. Brandon gave a nod but said nothing. Zeus continued barking, fixed on Grayson with an intensity that sent a ripple of unease through the corridor. Brandon placed a steadying hand on the dog's harness, signaling restraint. Zeus fell quiet, but his gaze remained locked. Sorry, Brandon said, voice measured. Sometimes he reacts to strong smells. Cleaning chemicals, maybe. Harold offered a forced smile. These floors don't clean themselves. The moment passed, but Brandon felt something settle in his gut like a lead weight. After Grayson wheeled his cart away and disappeared into a patient room, Brandon knelt beside Zeus. What was that? He whispered. The dog didn't respond, of course, but his attention didn't waver. It hadn't been a false alert. Back in the security office, Brandon reviewed camera footage from the last week. The janitor had been on shift each night. Nothing overtly suspicious. Routine trash collection, mop rounds, refill checks. But something didn't feel right. It was the way Grayson lingered. In several clips, he stood outside patient rooms for longer than seemed necessary, looking in even when no visible mess was inside. In one case, he entered a pediatric patient's room 3 separate times during one shift, only to remove an already empty trash bin and wipe an already clean sink. No one questioned it. No complaints had been filed, no thefts were reported, but the patterns repeated. Zeus's reaction stayed with Brandon. The dog's trained alerts were rarely wrong, not always narcotics, but sometimes substances hidden, layered, or altered. Zeus had received special training in detecting synthetic compounds used in chemical tampering, a certification only a handful of K9 units held. Something about that janitor didn't smell right to him, and Brandon trusted Zeus more than any data feed or report. The following night, Brandon altered their patrol route to include an earlier visit to the oncology wing. As they entered the hallway, Zeus immediately began scanning, his nose tilted upward, body low. Grayson wasn't visible, but the dog's signals didn't lie. Brandon spotted the janitor at the far end of the hall wheeling his cart out of a supply room. Zeus's ears shot up again. The low growl returned. Another bark. This time, Harold turned sharply and visibly flinched at the sound. "Same dog again?" he muttered, half joking. Brandon didn't smile. "He's usually quiet. Guess I got one of those faces dogs don't like," the janitor replied, shrugging. But Zeus wasn't reacting to his face. He was fixated on the cart. Brandon noted every detail. The cart was standard issue, double bin cleaning tray, ragged mop, bucket, plastic bags. But one compartment, normally used for storing wipes or gloves, was taped shut. A discreet black sticker covered the latch. Grayson noticed him looking. Had a busted hinge, keeps flipping open. Brandon made a mental note to check hospital maintenance records. That night, he requested access to environmental services logs. Grayson's schedule matched up with 2 recent incidents involving pediatric patients experiencing unexpected symptoms, vomiting, elevated heart rate, disorientation. All were attributed to chemo side effects or infection markers. None had been flagged as anomalous. Still, it felt too convenient. Brandon didn't voice his suspicions yet. He needed more. He returned the following night with a plan. A quiet coordination with the night nursing supervisor allowed him access to live feed cameras outside the oncology supply room, and he stationed himself in the back hallway with Zeus, watching. At 2:12 a.m., Grayson entered the supply room. He remained inside for nearly 6 minutes. When he emerged, Zeus lifted his head instantly, nostrils flaring. Another bark. Grayson didn't see them. Brandon had stayed out of view, but the dog's reaction was sharp and unmistakable. Brandon slipped down the hallway, watching as the janitor returned to his rounds, stopping outside a new patient's room. His hands disappeared into the cleaning cart briefly before he entered. Brandon didn't follow. Instead, he waited, then returned to the camera room and rewound the feed. There, a gloved hand sliding something from the taped compartment of the cart, a small vial, clear, unlabeled. No medical staff were nearby. No orders had been placed for that patient since 10 p.m. At 2:37 a.m., the patient pressed the call button, reporting dizziness and chills. Nurses attributed it to low blood sugar. Fluids were administered. The moment was documented, nothing more. The following evening, Brandon acted. He requested a full inspection of Grayson's cart. The janitor was cooperative but fidgety. The black sticker had been removed. The latch was now free. The compartment, however, was empty. No sign of a vial. Still, Zeus barked again, insistent, sharp, unrelenting. One of the senior nurses approached quietly after Grayson left. "He's new," she said. "Been here maybe 4 months, quiet, polite, doesn't talk much." Brandon nodded. "Any complaints?" She hesitated. "Not exactly, but Her eyes flicked down the hall. Two of the kids had weird reactions recently, minor things, but they happened right after he cleaned their rooms. I didn't think much of it. We just assumed it was the meds. Brandon filed it all away. Over the next 48 hours, he coordinated with hospital administration for a controlled test. A decoy medication tray was placed inside a patient's room. A hidden camera was installed. The room was marked for routine cleaning. Grayson was assigned the round. Brandon waited with Zeus just outside the west stairwell. At 1:44 a.m., Grayson entered the decoy room. Zeus growled again, a deep, vibrating sound from his chest. Inside, the footage captured Grayson bending over the medication tray. He reached into his cart, removed something small. His back blocked the view, but it was clear he tampered with the tray. 30 seconds later, he walked out, calm, casual. But Zeus wasn't calm. He barked so suddenly that the janitor visibly jumped, spinning around. This time, Brandon stepped forward. Evening, Grayson didn't smile. His jaw tightened. "Something wrong?" he asked. Zeus barked again, pawing at the cart. Brandon looked directly at the man. "We're going to need you to come with us." For a moment, something flickered in Grayson's eyes. Not fear, something colder, like a door slamming shut. He didn't argue, but Brandon could feel it, whatever this was. It ran deeper than one man and one night. There were patterns here, events waiting to connect, and only Zeus had seen what no one else could. Something was very wrong inside this hospital, and they had just begun to uncover it. The security office was uncomfortably quiet. The monitor displayed a paused frame, Harold Grayson in room 214, leaning over a tray of IV bags, his body obscuring the camera's view of the small vial he had slipped into his hand moments before. Brandon stood beside the desk, arms crossed tightly, Zeus seated silently at his heel. The dog's posture hadn't changed in the last 20 minutes, rigid, attentive, watchful. Across from them, Dr. Karen Mendoza, the hospital's risk officer, reviewed the footage again, her lips pressed in a thin line. "No one ever questioned his access to patient rooms?" Brandon asked, eyes not leaving the screen. "Janitors have standard clearance to clean all non-isolation rooms," Mendoza replied quietly. "But they're not supposed to touch anything medical, ever." Brandon tapped the keyboard, advancing the footage frame by frame. The movement was slight but deliberate. Grayson's gloved fingers reaching into the cleaning cart's concealed compartment, a brief pause. Then his shoulder shifted toward the medication tray. The hospital couldn't act on camera footage alone, not without confirming what had been administered. Yet Brandon's instincts, and more importantly Zeus's alerts, had never been this consistent without cause. By morning, the security team secured the medication from room 214. Preliminary testing by the hospital lab revealed a trace presence of non-registered compounds, not narcotics, not toxins, but a synthetic agent designed to mimic low-level inflammatory response. Enough to provoke symptoms, fever, nausea, fatigue. Symptoms easily attributed to pre-existing conditions, especially in cancer patients. They called it an anomaly in the report. Brandon called it intent. Still, Harold Grayson denied everything. When questioned, he claimed he was merely adjusting the tray for safety, that he noticed it was left too close to the edge, that he was following standard cleaning protocol. And there were no witnesses to say otherwise. No previous criminal record. No psychiatric history, clean employment background, 3 years at a hospice center before transferring to Memorial Heights, no red flags. But then Zeus barked again. 2 nights later on a new shift, this time Grayson hadn't even touched a medication tray. He'd only passed through the hallway near the pediatric wing when Zeus snapped to attention, emitting a low, urgent bark that reverberated down the corridor. The hospital administrator still hesitated. Too little concrete evidence. Too much risk of a lawsuit if the accusation turned out to be false. That's when Brandon made the call, request covert surveillance. It was an uphill battle, but Mendoza approved it under one condition: strict confidentiality. The cameras would be installed in all janitorial storage rooms and in the internal pharmacy waste disposal chute. "Why the chute?" Mendoza asked. Brandon showed her still frames from 3 different nights. Each time Grayson exited a patient room, he paused at the waste chute with his cart. The bags he discarded were heavier than standard trash. He always used the far chute, never the nearest one, never the one in view of the cameras. When asked about it during a shift review, Grayson shrugged. "Just habit," he said. "That one always seems less full." But now Brandon watched the live surveillance feed from the newly installed camera in that same chute hallway. At 3:06 a.m., Grayson appeared. He was pushing his cart slowly, his face neutral under the dim lights. He opened the chute lid, reached into his cart, removed a sealed black pouch. Brandon leaned forward. Zeus emitted a deep growl, low and steady. Grayson dropped the pouch into the chute, glanced over his shoulder, then calmly wheeled the cart away. Within an hour, the retrieval team descended to the waste collection area, normally off-limits without administrative clearance. Hidden beneath discarded linens and sharps containers was the same black pouch. Inside were 6 small vials, all unlabeled, each filled with a pale, slightly viscous fluid. Initial lab testing confirmed the worst. The substance wasn't simply chemical residue, it was biological. It triggered a cascading immune response in mice during preliminary trials, causing temporary white blood cell depletion and mimicking advanced infection markers. It was designed to appear like complications, fevers, infections, septic indicators, exactly the kind of symptoms that immunocompromised patients were already vulnerable to, exactly the kind of complications no one would question, and it hadn't happened once. The hospital lab, under Brandon's request, cross-tested 5 recent patient IV bags from rooms Grayson had entered during prior shifts. 3 showed similar contamination. Trace levels, just enough to push a fragile body over the edge of wellness into instability. The connection was undeniable. Still, it raised more questions than answers. Why? What did a janitor gain from causing controlled medical complications? Brandon stared at Grayson's employee record. It was clean, too clean. All evaluations marked satisfactory, references intact, no notations. But when he contacted the hospice center Grayson had previously worked at, something peculiar happened. There was no record of him. The name Harold Grayson never appeared on the payroll or volunteer registry, nor in security logs. The staff had no recollection of him. The ID badge, the reference letter, even the credentials fabricated. Memorial Heights had hired a man with a false identity. Suddenly, what seemed like a string of isolated incidents snapped into a far darker shape. Brandon requested police involvement. Quietly, a background check on Harold Grayson revealed the identity was a composite of partial data from multiple deceased individuals. The man's real name was still unknown, a fake name, a forged past, and now a growing list of medical sabotage. Still, Grayson hadn't been caught in the act. Not directly, not indisputably, and the hospital was balancing between damage control and containment until the 6th night. Brandon and Zeus were stationed in the pediatric isolation hallway, a sector that had experienced unusually high fevers among patients the past 2 weeks. It was off-limits except to assign nurses and cleaning staff. At 2:51 a.m., Grayson entered, alone. Zeus stirred before he came into view, then stood abruptly. He paced 3 steps, then barked, one loud, echoing report that seemed to punch through the sterile air. Grayson froze in the hallway. Zeus charged forward. No aggression, only unrelenting focus. He stopped at the cart. Brandon arrived seconds later. Grayson was visibly sweating. "I'm just cleaning the floor," he said quickly. Brandon looked at the cart, then at Zeus. The dog sat and stared, unmoving. The signal for a confirmed scent. Brandon reached down, unlatched the side compartment. Inside was the same black pouch. This time there was no denying it. Zeus barked once more. It was over. Grayson was taken into security custody. The contents of the pouch were sent for expedited testing. His locker was searched, so was his on-site storage bin. Inside was a small leather-bound journal. Neatly written entries detailed every patient Grayson had come into contact with. Each listing contained patient name, room number, medical condition, notes on reactions to stimulus dosage amounts, times of shift visitations, observational notes on recovery or decline. One note read, 3 drops = mild fever plus fatigue, observed elevated pulse within 1 hour. Nurse assumed infection IV changed, 0 suspicion. Another, targeted immune response mimics sepsis, dosage increase on next cycle, 8-year-old male likely won't survive. Brandon put the notebook down. He turned to Zeus, who had remained stationed at the corner of the locker room. The dog's alert had been unwavering. He had seen what no one else could. At sunrise, hospital administrators convened an emergency meeting. Brandon presented the evidence, the surveillance footage, the contaminated vials, the forged identity, and the journal. It was more than tampering. It was predation. A man had been testing biological agents on terminally ill patients. A man posing as a janitor. A man who had gone unnoticed for months, perhaps longer. By morning, hospital staff broke down in tears. Nurses who had administered routine medications began requesting emergency rechecks. Doctors reviewed patient logs with horror. Families were notified quietly, one at a time. The fallout would be massive. And through it all, Zeus remained calm, watching, waiting, standing sentinel beside the partner who never stopped trusting him. They had followed a pattern invisible to most, and finally, they had found the truth. But what haunted Brandon most was not what they had uncovered. It was the question still unanswered: who was he really, and how many other hospitals had he worked at before this one? Sunlight crept through the narrow windows of Memorial Heights Medical Center, brushing softly against floors that had witnessed horrors no one had yet spoken aloud. In a hushed conference room, administrators, medical staff, and law enforcement officers gathered in grim silence. The television monitor on the far wall displayed one name, Harold Grayson, unknown identity. Below it, a string of patient photos appeared. Children, many of them now gone. Some still fighting for their lives, unaware that someone trusted with a mop and a badge had meticulously worked to tip the scale against them. Brandon Keller stood at the edge of the room, his K9 partner Zeus at his side. The German shepherd was calm but alert, his eyes moving steadily from face to face, as if reading a room full of emotions too heavy to name. To him, the work had been instinct, but to Brandon it was something deeper. Zeus had seen past appearances, past credentials, past masks. He had seen what none of them wanted to believe. The meeting was led by Lieutenant Audrey Barnes, a seasoned investigator from the state's major crimes unit. Her tone was measured, but her expression betrayed the weight she carried. "We have confirmation," she said, gesturing to the screen. "The man known as Harold Grayson has no legal existence. The ID, certifications, references, all fabricated. He's used at least 5 aliases over the last 10 years, all linked to hospitals in 3 different states." A stunned silence settled over the room. "We believe he gained access using falsified hospice certifications. Most of the facilities were under-resourced. Background checks were inconsistent. His targets were always the same: high-risk patients in pediatric or terminal care units." Brandon's jaw tightened. Zeus remained still, as if absorbing the meaning behind the facts. Barnes continued, "We now have 12 confirmed victims at Memorial Heights with evidence of chemical tampering in 7 active cases. 3 children are currently in critical condition. 2 more have died within the last month, previously believed to be natural complications. That's under review now." Dr. Karen Mendoza spoke next. "We've initiated comprehensive blood screenings for every patient who came into contact with Grayson. We're also reviewing surveillance footage from the last 90 days. His movements were strategic. He avoided cameras, often altered waste disposal patterns, and created false cleaning logs." She paused, glancing toward Brandon, except when Zeus caught his scent. "That's what turned this entire case." The room shifted its focus to the dog sitting at Brandon's feet. He didn't acknowledge the attention. He didn't need to. He'd done his job, and something told Brandon they weren't finished. Later that afternoon, evidence technicians returned to the storage locker Grayson had used during his shifts. The journal had already revealed a dark obsession with control, notes, chemical trial reactions, pages annotated with exact physiological changes after each dose. But in a hidden compartment beneath the locker floorboard, they found something else. A flash drive. Encrypted, sophisticated. After hours of forensic work, the IT team cracked it open. Inside were dozens of folders, each one named after a hospital, each containing spreadsheets, notes, scanned ID badges, and lists of patients with dates, symptoms, and outcome assessments. There were files from facilities in California, Texas, and Illinois, notes dated as far back as 2016. But the most disturbing discovery was a video, time-stamped 2 years ago. A child, no older than 7, lying in a hospital bed, oxygen tubes in his nose, a faint tremble in his limbs. The camera was shaky, clearly hidden in a pocket or under clothing. Grayson's voice spoke softly, just out of frame. "Dose increase applied. Expected onset 40 minutes. Watching for visual tremors and initial vascular instability." There was no emotion in his voice, only the cadence of someone recording a clinical study. Dr. Mendoza had to leave the room before the video finished. Brandon didn't move. Zeus sat beside him, his head lowered slightly, eyes fixed on the screen, not understanding the images but sensing the grief flooding the room. Grayson remained silent during interrogation. No outbursts, no denials, just a blank, quiet presence. He requested legal counsel and declined all questions. Not once did he ask why he was being detained. His fingerprints returned no national matches. His DNA was still being processed. And the photographs on the flash drive revealed different versions of him over time, clean-shaven in one, bearded in another, always wearing hospital-issued uniforms from different states. He had been many people, to many hospitals, and to too many children. The forensic psychologist assigned to the case reviewed his journal entries and described a behavioral profile consistent with factitious disorder imposed on another, a rare and severe psychiatric condition where a perpetrator causes or fabricates symptoms in others to gain attention, control, or perceived sympathy. But this case lacked even that shallow emotional motive. It was colder, more clinical. Grayson's entries didn't express regret or satisfaction. They expressed curiosity, a fascination with the threshold between recovery and failure. As he wrote in one note, that he had hidden in plain sight for years was a failure beyond hospital policy. It was a failure of human intuition, except for one: Zeus. After the formal charges were filed, Brandon took Zeus to the pediatric ward. He hadn't returned there since the day of the confrontation, but several families had asked to see the dog. The hospital psychologist believed it might help. Michael, the 8-year-old boy whose medication had been tampered with but intercepted, was waiting in a wheelchair near the playroom. His face was pale, IV lines still connected, but he smiled the moment he saw Zeus. "He's the reason I didn't get worse," the boy whispered to his mother. Zeus walked forward without hesitation, resting his head gently in Michael's lap. The boy's hand stroked his ear in silent gratitude. Across the room, other children, some bald from chemotherapy, others pale from recent surgery, watched curiously. One by one they approached. Zeus remained calm, patient, present. No barking now, no tension, just the gentle stillness of a protector. Brandon stepped back, letting the moment belong to the children. 3 days later, Memorial Heights held a closed-door meeting for affected families. They weren't ready to face the public. Not yet, but they needed answers. Dr. Mendoza stood before them with Brandon and Zeus nearby. She outlined the full scope of the investigation, what they knew, what they had found, and what they were still uncovering. "We missed it," she said finally, her voice cracking. "We missed him." Some parents cried, others sat numb. A few nodded slowly, recognizing that grief was now tangled with relief. One father stood, his voice shaking. "My son had unexplained complications. We buried him last month. I thought it was the cancer. But if this man—" He trailed off. Dr. Mendoza nodded. "We'll re-examine his case. All of them. Every patient. We're coordinating with national health officials. If he worked elsewhere, we'll find it." Another parent looked at Zeus. "How did he know?" she whispered. Brandon answered quietly. "He didn't know who or why. He just knew something didn't belong. He was trained to find what humans miss, but this went beyond training." She nodded slowly. "Huh. Thank you for listening to him when the rest of us didn't." 1 week later, investigators found another flash drive, this one buried beneath the floorboards of an abandoned apartment across town. It contained a single document, a handwritten note, scanned and stored. "Control is the purest form of attention." It was signed only with the initials RC. Grayson still hadn't spoken. Not a word, not even when told about the findings, not even when shown the children. He sat in his holding cell, silent, cold, empty. But Brandon didn't need his confession, neither did Zeus. They had found the truth. One step, one bark, one alert at a time. And in doing so, they had restored something that had quietly begun to unravel in the halls of that hospital. Trust. Months later, Memorial Heights adopted a new protocol. Every pediatric floor would be visited by certified K9 units weekly, not just for safety but for healing. Zeus became a regular presence, not just a detector of threats, but a comfort to children fighting the hardest battles of their lives. To them, he wasn't just a dog who barked at a janitor. He was the one who saw what no one else did, the one who reminded the world that sometimes the strongest voices don't speak. They simply refuse to be silent when something is wrong. If that story shook you even half as much as it did us, hit that like button. It really helps more people see it. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next K9 story we're dropping, it's even more unbelievable. You won't want to miss it.